Well, I was going to sing that, but I'm glad Michelle did that for me. Thank y'all. I ought to thank her for that as well. There you go. I stand here before you with a heavy but peaceful heart. And peaceful because this journey has been amazing the last few years. I got to start with a funny Upshaw story because I'm trying to hold it together here. But some of you guys that played ball with us, y'all may remember this story. I got to tell it. Y'all probably know that Upshaw wasn't known for his speed and base stealing abilities. But I got to tell the story of the first and only that I know stolen base that Upshaw ever had. Playing Legion ball in Texarkana, True Love and Jason, I know y'all probably remember this. Upshaw could always hit it a mile, but couldn't run very fast. And he hit a rope up the middle, hit the pitcher in the ankle. And so he's standing on first base, and unbeknownst to Bobby, the umpire called timeout to give the pitcher a few warm-up pitches. And Coach Lloyd had always taught us if the pitcher goes from the windup, you got to go. Because he can't, once he starts home, he can't pick you off. So the pitcher starts from the windup, and Upshaw gets this look on his face, and he takes off running, and about an hour and a half later, he has the most beautiful pop-up slide you ever saw in the second. Stands up, he's all excited about this base he had stolen. And by then, we had done broke out in laughter in the dugout. So anyway, he had that long jog back to first once he realized the time had been called and the pitcher was just warming up. So this one of many Upshaw-isms out there, like the time, you remember, guys, when he had our whole team convinced around Easter time, the little bunnies that would come out, the little marshmallow bunnies called Peeps. I don't know if y'all remember. But anyway, he had us convinced that if you put a peep in your mouth like a chew of tobacco, it helped your hitting. So our whole team that Easter season went to the plate with a pink bunny in our mouth. I don't know if it worked, but we thought it did. But Upshaw always had those things like that, those little. He just always had a sense of humor and always kept you laughing. But I met Bobby in Miss Bostick's 3-year-old preschool class. There's a picture in there in the parlor of him standing on that ladder in the playground, and I had that same picture. And so that's where our relationship started. And throughout school, junior high and high school, I practically lived with you guys. And I don't know how many cans of raviolis and chicken soup, cream of chicken soup that Legene bought, but Chef Boyardee and Campbell's would be proud. And so they practically raised me for those years. And then we went off to college and were roommates in college. Of course, most of you know that it took us a while to get out of college in several colleges here and there. But we were roommates in college. We were in each other's wedding right here in this building. Like a brother to me. And I'm an only child, so the only brother I had. But so time took over, and careers and families and distance, he in Dallas in the Houston area and me just staying here in the country. We just kind of drifted apart. And over the years, and about 3 or 4 years ago, at church, Bud will remember, our preacher was doing a series on discipleship. And God was really tugging at my heart. Man, I was on fire, and I was really wanting to figure out what it meant to be a true disciple. And I prayed to God, show me how to be a better disciple. Show me how to be a man of God, a kingdom man. And as you know, you got to be careful what you pray for, because God will reveal himself and he will show up. And he did. And not long after that, Bobby showed up at my house one morning. I hadn't seen him in years, and we had talked a little on the phone and knew of some struggles he was having. But he showed up on this day, and we began an amazing roller coaster ride together, battling demons. And but through all that, something really amazing was happening. People say I was helping him, but he was helped me too. And so when I got the news of his passing, I laid in there in the bed and kind of thinking about the last several years. And, you always have kind of a heavy heart. God, this is not how I planned it to end. And, but I've come to realize over the years something that, what I call a prayer expectation gap. What I prayed for and what happened wasn't the same, but something amazing that night came to me in the loudest voice, and he said, but I answered your prayers. I fixed him. I fixed his heart. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, so many conversations we had, so many things that went on throughout this journey and this roller coaster ride, God showed up so many times and revealed himself. And I know where Bobby's heart was. His heart for God was amazing. His desire to be a kingdom man was amazing. His love for his daughter was amazing. And I just stand here today with a peaceful heart because I know from the talks we've had and the things I've seen, without a doubt that, man, I'll see you soon. I know it. So I hope y'all understand where Bobby's heart was, because he had an amazing one, and he had an amazing heart for God. And I just want to give y'all peace and comfort, friends and family, that we'll see him soon. And so thank y'all.
It's a great picture of Bobby right there. And same one, I guess it's on the and as I sat listening to Michelle's beautiful song, and I was staring into Bobby's eyes, I hadn't put my eyes on him in many years. But all I could think of is walking up these steps is he's somewhere shaking his head thinking, how could they give the mic to the one guy that could ruin a funeral? But I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. And Shane, I love you, man. That was great. And you probably expect a lot of funny stories about us growing up with Bobby. We had a lot of good times. Shadowwood was our hangout. It was our Super Bowl. It was our Madison Square Garden, our Nolan Field House, as Bobby called it. It was everything we could want. We laughed. We got mad and fought each other. We bet money on who'd win those fights. And we sat around and talked about our plans for life. And everybody knows how much fun Bobby was to be around. And several of you could get up here and tell stories about awesome stories that we'd all be laughing until church starts tomorrow. We could tell Little League stories. We could tell fishing stories. We could tell pick-up basketball stories. We could tell stories about stupid stuff we did in school. But every time we got together, no matter what the plan was, we knew it was going to be a lot of fun because Bobby was going to be in the middle of it. And that his sense of humor, he had such an awesome sense of humor. It was like a glue that held any group that he was in together. And while it's good to remember all those happy memories that we have of Bobby, today's also about closure. And it'd be tempting just to talk about all the good things. But out of respect for Bobby, I'd like to go a little bit deeper today. Because there's more to Bobby's life than just funny stories about the good times. And there's definitely a part of this that if you don't know about it, I think you'd like to know. To do this, I'm going to need your trust. This is too important not to tell. But it has a happy ending. Like all really good stories with meaningful, happy endings, first you have to talk about some of the sadness that came before it. And this contrast brings out the meaningful truth that everybody seeks and looks for out of life. And I think we can face certain truths head on without getting bogged down in the details. But the bottom line is I want to say what Bobby would say if he could stand up on this stage and have one chance to address everybody here tonight. So that's what I'm going to try to do. On the morning of June the 15th, Miranda came and told me that she'd seen the message on Facebook that Bobby had passed. And that news pretty much made me sick to my stomach. And that sick feeling was guilt. See, I've been caught up in my own life, my own problems, stuff that I was involved with, and I hadn't talked to Bobby in many years. I tried to pass messages to him through Shane and others, and I never got any response. And at that moment when I heard of him passing, I felt it was just guilt, because I felt like I knew that he had been struggling and that I hadn't done near enough to help. And also my fear was that he had thought I had cut him out of my life. And the reason that I feared that was because in part it was true. We had a lot of fun growing up, playing horse, and water skiing, and doing all the stuff that we did, listening to the Beastie Boys, and drinking. We drank a lot. And those good times were awesome, and I guess we just kind of always thought maybe they'd go on forever. And it was about in 1990 that I realized that they couldn't. I'd been baptized not long before that, and that day, and Bobby and I got together as usual. One of the first things we decided was that we needed some beer. So we headed on to Brookshire's and hit the express checkout lane, and we were standing there. We were next in line, and I heard a noise, and I turned around, and I saw the preacher at the end of the line that had just baptized me. So I took my money and handed the beer to Bobby, and I handed him the money, and I said, "Pay for this, and I'll see you in the parking lot." And so I quickly wheedled back around and talked to the preacher, shook his hand, and talked to him. And, to this day, I know I didn't fool him, but he was too nice of a man to humiliate me there at the checkout line in Brookshire's. But that troubled me. You might think that I would have been too ashamed or that we would have been too ashamed to drink the beer, but we drank it. We drank all of it. And but afterwards, I was troubled. And I knew that if I was going to be the kind of man that I wanted to be, that I had to turn away from getting drunk at every opportunity. And so that began a process, and it didn't happen fast. It didn't happen consistently, and it didn't happen without falls back into old habits. But one thing that happened was, as a result of that, is I kind of distanced myself from my friends to avoid the temptation to drink. And this seemed to work for me for a while, but the problem was that I had avoided any responsibility that I had for sharing with Bobby or any of my other friends what motivated this change. Bobby and I never spoke about spiritual matters. We talked about things that we were dealing with from time to time, but we pretty much kept it at surface level. That's why when I learned about his death, it hurt so badly. I knew that as his friend, I'd failed him. I failed to tell him how my faith in Jesus had helped me through the problems of my life. And I failed to be there to listen to him about the problems that he had. I tried to imagine how his life ended. Was he alone? Did he feel like there was nobody there that cared? And what would he say to me now, if he could? I was ashamed and I was heartbroken at the thought of him being all alone at the end of his life. But then the next morning, I got a call from Shane. And he answered all my questions. Shane told me that Bobby had been battling with alcohol and had reached out to him about 3.5 years before that for help. But that call began a pattern with Shane and Bobby where Bobby would get clean, get into a treatment program, return to Houston, and then eventually he'd relapse. But Shane said that about 9 months ago, that it seemed to him that Bobby had made a breakthrough in his sobriety and that he began to take Jesus seriously. What Shane told me about Bobby's struggle with alcohol was not good, but as he was telling me about it, about the last 3.5 years, it made that sick feeling in my stomach go away. Even though I believed that I had selfishly failed Bobby, he did have someone to turn to for help. He had someone who took him in, who fed him, cleaned him up, listens to his problems, gave him good advice. And the best news of all was that Shane told me about those deep conversations they had. He told me about how the last 8 or 9 months of Bobby's life, that it had forced him to really become a follower of Jesus. And that news put me at ease. In fact, it was such a great comfort that as I listened to what Shane was telling me, it reminded me of something a friend of mine at church had said just a couple weeks before in Sunday school. His name's Tom Cook, and Tom is a recovering alcoholic. He'd been clean for many years. He's a good Christian man, and he's open about his past struggles. And we were studying the book of Genesis. And Tom started out talking about how in AA, one of the things that they have to do there is get newcomers to accept the fact that there's a higher power. And a lot of people who are new to AA don't believe in God, and so they try to explain it using things like, well, this power's outside of you. It's like the sun comes up and sets, and you have no control of that. You don't have any input, and yet it happens. So there's something outside of you that's more powerful than you. And Tom's what you would call a good old country boy. In fact, he bears a little bit of a likeness and sounds a whole lot like Carl Childers from the movie Sling Blade. And one thing that everybody in our church laughs at is Tom has this hang-up about why God would put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. And I struggled about whether or not I should impersonate him, but Bobby always loves stupid impersonations, so I'm going to do it. Here's what he'd say. Why did he put it there? I can't understand the purpose of the tree being in the garden except to get them in trouble. Why would God put that temptation there for them to stumble? And as I sit listening, talking to Shane, thinking about what Tom would say, what he said that day, it clicked for me. Without experiencing sin, how can we understand forgiveness? Without falling away, how could we ever understand what it's like to be redeemed? Our lives at times can be really carefree and awesome, but other times we find ourselves in big messes, and sometimes other people make those messes and we have to try to deal with them, but a lot of times we are the ones who make those messes. It's because we're human, we're selfish, and we sin. So the question is it cruel or unjust that we're allowed to suffer the consequences of sin? I have a nephew who's struggling with this right now. He's raised in a Christian home, and he's unfortunately had 2 friends that were very close to him that died tragic deaths. And to paraphrase his question, what kind of a God would allow this kind of suffering to happen? Isaiah prophetically foretold how God would answer this in chapter 53 of the book of Isaiah when he told the coming of Jesus Christ. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of parched ground. He has no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And like one from whom men hide their face, he was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening for our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourge we are healed. All of us, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way. But the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. And after Jesus had risen from the dead and ascended back into heaven, the writer of Hebrews ended chapter 4 with this: Therefore, since we have such a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weakness, but one who has been tempted in all things, as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. You see, this is the meaning of life. The God who created the earth and all the universe around it created this reality to teach us how to rely on God. That means something different to every person because every person lives differently. To some that can accept God's way easily, they struggle a lot less. Others resist. And I know this personally because I'm one of those who likes to learn the hard way. Hard way learners, unfortunately, have to suffer in order to understand that our way of doing things doesn't work. Alcohol didn't solve anyone's problem. It hadn't solved any of mine. It didn't solve any of Bobby's. We all know Bobby was a smart guy. So why did he struggle so much? Bobby might have understood the concept of Jesus long before the last 9 months of his life. But as Shane said, this was when his beliefs seemed to become real to him. Shane said something clicked for Bobby, and he began to develop faith. A deep faith. Shane told me how Bobby realized that before this, he had treated others badly and then blamed them for his problems. Shane said that Bobby had learned to forgive others precisely because he had been forgiven. He learned to forgive himself as well. It's not that Bobby was a bad guy, and I loved him like a brother, but the Bobby I grew up with and ran around with, drank with, simply didn't understand Jesus in that deep firsthand way. Shane told me that although there were a lot of good times he spent with Bobby in the last 3.5 years, there were also some difficult times. He said that towards the end of last year that they had a little bit of a disagreement and they had to put things on hold. So he went for a while without speaking to Bobby. But he was on business around February down in Houston. And he said that while he was down there, he felt an overwhelming urge to go see Bobby. He tracked Bobby down to where he was living. And the facility had some strict rules about visitors and the times that they could visit. And because of his business, Shane hadn't made it in time. But he said that he basically begged the people at the facility. He explained to them how far he had come and what this visit meant, and that eventually they relented and they went to get Bobby. So Shane sat in the lobby, and as he waited, he said he saw Bobby come down the stairs. And he said he got up, went to meet him, and not a word was spoken. They just hugged each other and they cried. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful moment, because at that moment, Bobby knew truly what it was like to be loved in the deepest, most true meaning of the word. So the question, again, is what kind of God would allow Bobby to suffer this way? And the answer to the question is the same that was foretold by Isaiah and the same that was written of in the New Testament. And the answer to the question is that God sent his own Son to die on the cross so that we could understand the meaning of forgiveness and of love and of hope and of reconciliation. I love Bobby, and I'm sad for the suffering that he went through in his life. But if all that suffering served the purpose of helping him come to faith in Jesus, then it was worth it. But the story of Bobby is not just that he suffered through these problems and came to truly understand love, forgiveness, hope, and the many other gifts that originate from Jesus. It's bigger than that. The story actually goes back further to when God started molding Shane into the Christian man that he is today. 15 years ago, Shane went through his own struggles that could have turned him bitter, maybe even destroyed his family. But instead of evil coming from these challenges, it resulted in Shane's strong faith in God. God challenged Shane, and he prepared him to reach out to Bobby. How awesome is that? And let me tell you about the God that we serve. It's even more awesome than that. Because the morning that I sat there ashamed, guilty, before Shane's call, God was preparing me, because I hadn't been in Bobby's life in years. And I felt like I had failed him. But this is how awesome God is. He opened this door for me to stand here today, and at the end of it all, to be back in Bobby's life. And to tell you, share with you, how much love Bobby felt, how much at peace he was, and how much God did for him. That's an awesome God. So the happy mention that I talked about in the beginning is this, that God never stops reaching out for us. He spent 45 years reaching out to Bobby. He prepared Shane and his family to reach out as well. He's reaching out to all of us. In the end, it's sad that we can't see Bobby anymore, but if Bobby's with Jesus, then that's the happiest ending possible. So the challenge is for us, do you believe? Will you follow him? And will you share Jesus with those around you? Thank you.
Awesome and powerful. As we're here today, one of the things that happens, we read in Psalm 23, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. That's really kind of where we are today. It does make us think about these things, deep things. To conclude, just, preachers got to do 3 points, so they're going to be quick, but bear with me, all right? Number one, all we like sheep have gone astray. That was read from Isaiah 53. We have to consider that today. How does that happen? As a pastor for many years, the way it happens is we take one step over into something we shouldn't probably be in, something we probably shouldn't do. We always think that when that's done, I'm going to step back. But what we don't realize is that when we take that step, patterns are formed, things begin to happen, things are unleashed, and it becomes not as simple to step back as it was to step here. Sometimes then there can be another step, or sometimes it's just getting laid hold, stuck right there. And we can talk about alcohol, but as pastors, we see it with pornography. As pastors, we see it with drugs. As pastors, we see it just in all kinds of sexual stuff in our culture and our society. It can be with gambling. Our sinful nature almost has an addictive aspect to it. And that is the sin, and that is the way we go astray. So there's a tremendous need for grace and what God has done for us in Jesus Christ. And Chris has done a great job of helping us see that. And it's a cautionary tale to every one of us for those steps. One of the awesome things that's similar, just recently read a book called The Compound Effect. And it talks about that if we do one thing, if we take one step, we're very likely to take that step again. The time when we're teenagers and they hand us a joint, the time when we're teenagers, they hand us a beer. There's time when we're teenagers and for us as guys, the girl shows up or the guy shows up. And there's these moments that define us so many times because we just think one step, one time. At work, in our business, to do something shady, to make that deal, to do that thing, one thing. I remember praying with a young woman that God had been working in her life when she was a junior in high school, and all of a sudden the most popular guy in high school showed up and wanted to go out with her, and she was just moderately attractive. She was just one of the girls lost in the junior class, and the best looking guy in the school shows up and wants to go out with her. So God just got chunked. Guy was it. 3 years later, she's at the altar. She won't even come to the altar. She's about 3 feet back from the altar, crying, and I go to pray with her, and she says, "How did I get so far away?" One step, one decision at a time. And there's a compound effect. And that compound effect can also be for the good with Bible reading, with going to church, with going with the right people and the right friends, and to learn to use that wisely. We all know the thing about 6 degrees of separation, I hope, since I'm referencing it like that, no one explained it a whole lot. But I'm always interested at funerals that we're sitting here today because to some degree we had a connection to Bobby. I would promise you there's people here today that probably never actually met Bobby in person. Okay? But it comes to us through 6 degrees of separation, or just we knew him, we had a relationship, and his life has touched our life, which is one of the reasons why we're here today. And that's why it's awesome to see the picture. It's awesome to see the pictures in there. Asking to have those times, the good times you were talking about, those memories that we sift through, and to know that our lives have influence. We need to be aware our lives have influence, and we're influencing people that we don't have any idea that we're influencing through that 6 degrees of separation. I'm standing here today more for my relationship with Shane than I am for my relationship with Bobby, although I had a relationship with Bobby and he was steady in my prayers over these last 3 years too, so there was a strong connection in that way. Your life has influence, has impact, and then today we're here. I hope that you'll reflect on how Bobby's life impacted you, and there's lots of good memories and there's lots of laughs because he liked to laugh and he enjoyed life, and nothing wrong with those things at all. Then it was awesome that Amazing Grace was sung. I had seen it in the program. I kind of assumed it would be the traditional Amazing Grace, okay? First of all, the traditional Amazing Grace was written by John Newton. I don't know how many of you are familiar with his story, but he was a slave trader. And then God's grace convicted him of what a horrific thing that was. Not just a bad thing, what a horrific thing that it was. And that conviction broke him. But if you'll hear that second verse of it, it was grace that convicted him, but then it was grace that led him to the Savior to set him free. And that song, Amazing Grace, is when we believe in Jesus Christ. That is where every one of us are. There is not one of us, by being good enough or doing the right thing or by not falling into this ditch or that ditch, there's not one of us that earned our salvation. It is amazing grace that which we're saved. And so it's not like we sit here and, well, did he earn it or not earn it? That's never the issue at a funeral. The glorious thing is the victory that we have in Jesus Christ, because Isaiah 53 is about the suffering servant who our sins are upon him, and he died on our behalf. He was the ransom that was paid for me, for Bobby, for anybody who puts their faith in Jesus Christ. Then how glorious it was today that the amazing grace, and you can come sing at my church anytime, but that one would be good too. That one, we'll go with that, all right? Because we sang the Chris Tomlin bridge, "My chains are gone." And when I first realized that was the version right early on, you heard that in there, I started having to process that, to think. Because one of the things that was hard with Bobby was those chains. And he so desperately wanted to be free. And one of the things that I've really been praying for in this is just, especially just for Ashlyn, because Bobby wanted to love Ashlyn as a good dad and to have a great relationship with her, and for her to know how much he loved her. That was one of the driving things in his life that made him battle. But there were just chains that he had let in that continued to pull him down. Something that hadn't been said to me that's just important in the story that's been left out, and it's just a brief piece, because spend some time. Bobby had been around church enough to have the Jesus deal in his mind, okay? But trying to really believe it. That deal of just that final step over. Yeah, I believe it. I get it. I can hear all about it. I can have it in my head. And he had it in his head, but he struggled to get it into his heart and to really believe it. And one of his last rehabs was a Christian rehab. Okay, it was a Christian rehab. And it finally started to click. And Shane, I may need you to help me, because there were times that they would go out from that rehab and they would go out and minister, and Bobby would minister. And if you know anything about Bobby, he ain't going to be a hypocrite. If I don't believe it, I'm going to sit there and shut up and you talk and I'll nod, maybe. But the only way that Bobby would have ever taken an active role in those things as they went out is because he was getting it and he understood it. There are other signs as well, but that to me was just so big, because Bobby, and he's not going to be a hypocrite. And yet in that rehab, he began to go out and do some witnessing and the serving. So, amazing grace. My chains are gone. And that's the glory of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because today, his chains are gone. And he's been set free. And he's set free forever. When we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, one of the things that comes to us is the eternal nature of life. Because God breathed his breath into us. And in our heart and in our spirit, we understand that there's a spiritual dimension of life. Then it's what we do with that. We live in a world now where we get exposed to many truths, you can't call them truths, many different philosophies of life. And we have to decide, what do I believe? That's why I love when Jesus said to Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me shall never die. Then when he got done, he said, do you believe this? Okay, one other thing that was read in John 14, Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. In our day, in our time, it's so important what we believe. Because every one of us, to some degree, have taken this step. And the only way that we are restored is by the amazing grace. and the chains are gone. And we can experience a freedom in this life that's a taste, a glimpse of the glory and the freedom that's our life to come. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. My chains are gone. I've been set free. That's Bobby's testimony, his story of the victory of faith. His life was a journey. Our lives have been touched. I hesitated to use this because I hope this is not bad, but I knew driving over, you'd pass a watermelon stand, so I passed like 5 of them. And that was just, I took it like confirmation because there's so many things. Like if you know me, there's lots of seeds. And maybe there's a little bit of good stuff. So you got to spit out the seeds and enjoy the good stuff. And our memories of Bobby, there's a lot of stuff there. And as we go forward processing his life, lay hold of the good things, the laughter and the good stories. And Chris, it's good to process in your life our testimony. I'm working with the guy on South Longview who just got shot 3 times. And he needs some new friends. And one of the first things he's got to do is he's got to let the friends he has go. Who knows if it may cycle around for him back in his life to make a difference with those friends, but it's not his job right now to save those friends. Because he's got to learn what it means to have a new life first. So you went through a time when you had to learn what it means to have a new life. And then there are times sometimes it cycles back around to us to get to be a witness, to get to be a testimony, to reach out and lift up. But we have to be ready for that and strong enough for that. God is present. He is here. Our next song is going to be Lead Me Home, then I'll give the benediction. And again, just in light of amazing grace, now comes Lead Me Home. Thanks be to God.